Okay.
All right, ready?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April meeting of Mental Health San Francisco Implementation Working Group. I now call the meeting to order. Please note that this meeting is being recorded on WebEx. The recording will be available on the Mental Health SF website. I will now move to the land acknowledgement. The San Francisco Department of Public Health staff acknowledges that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. Today, we have the following goals for our meeting. Receive an update from Dr. Kunins, the Director of Behavioral Health Services and Mental Health San Francisco on SB 43 and Care Court with Dr. Angelica Almeida, Director of the Adult and Older Adult System of Care. Hear an update on the city's overdose prevention and response efforts from Population Behavioral Health Director Jeffrey Hom, and plan for upcoming IWG meetings. All right, so did we want to,
We're going to go to slide 37, which is the attendance and stuff like that, that we can vote on. Slide 37.
okay, Diana.
Roll call will now be taken to document quorum. When I say your name, please jump up and down or say here or something. Member Fields.
Present.
Member Gonzalez. Here. Member Lipton.
Here.
Member McGuigan.
Here.
Member Patterson.
Here.
Member Salinas.
Here.
Member Short. And Member Wong emailed us. She's helping her kid move, so she will be out. So we have 7 out of 8 members present. So we do have a quorum to continue. And then we need to vote to excuse Member Wong. So yeah, Member Wong emailed us. And Chair, is there any discussion before we vote whether or not to excuse Member Wong?
Move to excuse. Second.
Okay,
Efficiency.
now this is all you. Isn't this all you, Diana?
Oh, yeah. Oh, so now I'm going to call roll and ask you whether or not you would like to vote to excuse Member Wong. So yes means that you vote to excuse her. Member Fields.
Yes.
Member Gonzalez.
Yes.
Member Lipton.
Yes.
Member McGuigan.
Yes.
Member Patterson.
Yes.
Member Salinas.
Yes.
Member Short.
Yes.
So we have 7 yeses and 0 no's. So we have a majority vote to excuse Member Wong.
Now, are we
Should we do the minutes now? Okay, so then let's go back to the presentation, which starts on slide 4.
Okay. We are moving to discussion item number 1, our update from Mental Health SF Director, Dr. Hillary Kunins. Dr. Kunins will be joined today by Dr. Angelica Almeida to talk about SB 43 and the Care Court. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for inviting us to talk about this topic. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Almeida, and we are, of course, if there's time, happy to answer questions.
You want questions at the end or during the presentation?
Sure, let's do questions at the end. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good to see everyone. Okay. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide. So first, we're going to start talking about Care Court, which launched in October of 2023. So people may be aware, Care Court is created through legislation SB 1338. We are a cohort 1 jurisdiction, but ultimately all counties in California will need to implement Care Court. Care Court is unique because it allows for a wide range of petitioners to petition directly to the court. And it has some fairly strict criteria, but ultimately, if someone is deemed to be eligible for care court, is not engaged in treatment, they can either agree to participate or the court can order somebody to participate in what is called a care plan, which is for 12 months and then can be extended for an additional 12 months. Criteria for care court is that somebody has to be not engaged in treatment and they have to have a schizophrenia spectrum diagnosis. So this is specific that just something like bipolar disorder doesn't qualify for care court, but an unspecified schizophrenia would, for example. This is really meant to be upstream from more restrictive interventions, even assisted outpatient treatment, certainly conservatorships. So the goal of care court is really to get ahead of the curve of people who are at risk of negative outcomes and to support engaging with them early on and try to support bringing them into care. Next slide. So delving into criteria a little bit more, again, an individual has to be over the age of 18. So this is only for adults. They have to have a schizophrenia spectrum diagnosis. They have to be not stabilized in ongoing voluntary treatment. And one of these two needs to be true. Either the person is unlikely.
Sorry, they're not in ongoing voluntary treatment, not that they have to be stabilized in ongoing, that grammar is a little, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it, thank you.
And I should clarify, like somebody may have an existing provider, but they're not engaging in that treatment, and that potentially could qualify them.
Okay, yeah.
And so one of these two needs to be true. Either the person needs to be unlikely to survive safely in the community without intervention, and they need to be deteriorating. So we need to provide evidence of that. Or the person needs services and supports that are needed to prevent relapse or deterioration that would likely result in the person being gravely disabled and needing a more restrictive intervention like a 5150. We have to show that care court is the least restrictive alternative to support somebody's recovery and wellness, and that the person is likely to benefit from care court. For those of you who are familiar with assisted outpatient treatment, a lot of these criteria will probably sound very familiar. There's a lot of language that was lifted out of the assisted outpatient treatment legislation and adopted for care court. But again, one of the things that really sets care court apart is that many individuals can file petitions directly with the court. Whereas for something like assisted outpatient treatment, there's a team with the Department of Public Health that engage individuals, assess their appropriateness, and then can file with the court. These petitions can come from a broad range of petitioners. So this could be from a behavioral health provider, which certainly can include the Department of Public Health. The hospital could directly file with the court, for example. But it also can include first responders, family members, public guardian or conservators, hospital directors, et cetera. The person themselves can file a petition with the court if they wanted to. So that is a unique part of the process. When petitions are filed with the court directly, that of course does not mean that somebody's going to be court ordered to participate in treatment. So if a family member, for example, files a petition with the court, the court reviews the case to determine if there's prima facie evidence. So there's basic evidence that the person may meet criteria. And all of those cases come to the Department of Public Health for further evaluation, goal being to engage people in voluntary treatment. But ultimately, the Department of Public Health makes a recommendation if care court should proceed. Next slide. Okay, perfect. This just gives a little bit, a very simplified workflow. The care court legislation is super specific with lots of hearings for individuals, lots of noticing individuals that they have hearings. And so there's a lot of details in the mix for care court. But again, there's a long list of potential referrents. We also encourage people to contact the Department of Public Health. We have a consultation line. So you see here both an email and a phone number. So while people can file directly with the court, it's a pretty significant process to do that. And so we really want to encourage people to feel free to contact us. And again, we'll investigate a case and we can always be the petitioner with the court if it's an appropriate intervention, or may identify other appropriate interventions for the person. But in any situation, whether DPH files or another person files, DPH reviews the case, does an investigation report, and ultimately becomes a petitioner in every case that they proceed through care court. Okay, next slide. One of the questions we get a lot, understandably, is how is this different than anything else we have? And so as we've talked about, care court is meant to be really the most upstream of our solutions, of our civil court interventions. So more upstream than assisted outpatient treatment, more upstream than conservatorship. So we put this together, which just outlines like the details of how care court, AOT, and conservatorship are different. Just a couple of things to highlight. Care court is the only court that allows for family members, first responders, et cetera, that broad range of petitioners to file directly with the court. That is not the case for AOT or conservatorship. Care court, again, you have to have a schizophrenia spectrum diagnosis. When we look at assisted outpatient treatment, how that is really different is that AOT requires that somebody have previous negative outcomes to qualify for assisted outpatient treatment as an intervention. So they either have to have had 2 or more psychiatric hospitalizations, or 1 or more documented threats, attempts, or acts of violence towards themselves or others to qualify. That being said, what I'll share is AOT and care court are very similar in interventions in that there are no enforcement mechanisms. Ultimately, what AOT and care court are leveraging is what is frequently referred to as the black robe effect, or this idea that there's a symbolic weight of the court that a judge is telling you to do something, you're more likely to do it. Of course, the goal for both of these programs is, again, to be more upstream from things like inpatient hospitalizations or conservatorship that do have more enforcement tools available. And so the goal in all of these situations is to engage people in voluntary care whenever possible, but certainly to support people to stabilize in these programs, because these are all individuals that are potentially at risk of being on a pathway to more restrictive interventions. That is care court. Maybe what I'll do is I'll pause here just to see if there's any questions about care court before we jump into SB 43.
What's AOT? Sorry.
Sorry, AOT is assisted outpatient treatment. It's more commonly referred to as Laura's Law.
Gotcha. Right.
And that was implemented in August of 2015.
Thank you.
So I do have some questions. So it's curious because I think, for instance, for us, we've had a couple of folks that we work with that APS really wants to refer to care court for habitability issues in the units. And I'm curious because, you know, these folks typically actually don't have a schizophrenia spectrum disorder. I think, you know, there's histories, you know, often folks get diagnosed with something one time when they go to PS, right? And really it's substance-induced psychotic disorder. And so it does say other psychotic disorders. Do the
substance-induced psychotic disorders are excluded.
Okay. But it's a little bit tough to suss out because we as providers were like, you know, we don't really think they will benefit from care court. This is, you know, substance is what's really happening, but we're finding that other providers really, that's not my glasses.
They may not work.
Thank you though for
Just reading one.
and so with the public guardian, so are they referring folks? And it's curious about how that will work. Are they, you know, because they are. So would they be folks that they might assess and think, oh, they don't meet criteria for this for LPS conservatorship, but maybe could benefit from care court? Is that how that would generally work? And when folks are in care court, do they have somebody like a conservator, or is it just that then their provider, like who makes treatment decisions for them if they're unwilling to consent to treatment?
Super appreciate both those questions. So I'll take the first in that APS certainly can and has identified some
And APS, Adult Protective
Sorry, thank you.
Services. Just to make sure everyone knows.
So APS can and certainly has consulted with us about cases. In some situations, they may not meet criteria. Care court the legislatively requires us to provide a lot of evidence to the court of a diagnosis to show that history. So in some cases, it might seem to be more substance related, and we might look at different interventions to engage the person. And then, of course, we know that there are people who have really complex presentations, and it's a little bit unclear. And if there's an endogenous mental health diagnosis or something that's underlying that's exacerbated by substance use. And so we really do a lot to delve into that information. And a part of the process, which is also similar for assisted outpatient treatment, is we at the Department of Public Health really see our role primarily being this is an opportunity to engage people in voluntary care. Some cases go to the court, but wherever possible, if there's off ramps from a court process so that we can engage people in care and have this conversation with them about what that looks like, we do that. I think sometimes there are also cases where, of course, we don't want to jump to something restrictive like conservatorship, and we want to critically look at when we're doing that, when it's appropriate. And sometimes it's really appropriate to jump to that. And I know we'll be talking about SB 43 next. So just to say, there are some cases where we look at the totality of a situation and say, like, care court is not going to be sufficient to meet that person's need, and we need to look at something more intensive to support them.
I see. So those folks who would not voluntarily consent to treatment, they would jump from probably then from, or they would be not jump, but, you know, be
Potentially.
shifted to LPS.
So it depends on what's going on for that person and how deteriorated they are. Like, care court is never going to be a substitute to support somebody who is meeting grave disability criteria. That being said, there are some cases where we're worried that somebody might deteriorate and need conservatorship, but maybe this is an opportunity to try to engage them in a different way. And it might ultimately lead towards conservatorship if we're not successful in stabilizing them, but that's not an absolute either. The second piece I'll say to answer your other question, care court, unlike something like conservatorship, care court does not actually give us any authority to consent to treatment services on somebody's behalf. What it does is it provides the care plan can be an order from the court where the judges say, you need to engage in outpatient services. We actually are entering into a contract with Citywide. So similar to AOT, Citywide will provide the intensive case management services for individuals who are court ordered to participate in care court. But it really is just the work that we're currently doing around building those relationships, engaging with individuals. What care court and AOT do afford us the opportunity to do is to really intensely outreach and individuals and try to support them because of the court process, even when they're telling us no. So while we can't consent to services on somebody's behalf, it allows us to continue that intensive outreach and engagement efforts.
And so it has potentially, I see Steve then. So it has potentially some of the incentives like AOT has or something to try and get, you know, the gift cards or fun.
Yes,
those
absolutely.
sort of
Yeah, the
things.
court has like gift cards if somebody shows up to court. Obviously, there's a lot. It operates, for those of you who are familiar with the criminal collaborative courts, it operates very similar in that way that like there's really that goal to engage people, to support them, to praise any level of engagement in the process.
And then if they are not still linking with all the outreach and the incentives, then they would get shifted to CHAP.
Potentially, they'll still need to, of course, meet that grave disability criteria, but that potentially is a pathway for someone.
So are you all anticipating, are you guys anticipating having to hire more conservators? Or do you think that right now what they got is, it's to be determined still, the expansion of the conservatorship department? So I feel like it's
Why don't we hold that? I mean, I think you're raising issues of resources as these new programs have been come online.
and
I think we'll talk-
enforcement of medications that doesn't work now.
Not that yet.
Steve Fields, and then so we'll do Steve,
Thank you.
Emil, and then did you have questions, Sarah? Did you? No.
Always, but no.
Okay, so we'll do that order. Okay, Mr. Fields.
Mr. Fields. Okay, thank you. Three, two quick and maybe one not so quick. I just want to clarify. So the other psychotic disorders language is in the enabling legislation?
Yes, and that being said, they have provided us with a list of specific diagnoses. So like the unspecified schizophrenia as an example.
Okay. All right. And in connection with that, you alluded to this, which I think is an important point. At what point is the characteristically shifting diagnosis for somebody who's encountered at different points of an episode come into play with dismissing their appropriateness for care court? We have so many people whose diagnosis changes within days. As we know, it's not a science, it's an art form.
Yeah.
So at what point is that part of the determination about whether care court is appropriate or not?
And Steve, like you said, it's an art form. So I'll say there's not an exact answer to this. I think it really depends on the person and the totality of their history and what records we're able to receive to look at, like, it is like the schizophrenia spectrum diagnosis a new diagnosis, or do they have a long history that we know is like complex with substance use, for example? And we request records from other hospitals. Of course, we look in our electronic health records to try to gather that. And there's no easy answer to that. And of course, like that's part of the discussion in the court process. For us, for the Department of Public Health team, like as we're making recommendations to the court, of course, we really need to believe that the totality of the evidence is that somebody has an underlying schizophrenia spectrum diagnosis that may be complicated by lots of different factors. But we need to be able to discuss that and be able to provide evidence towards that.
But the stability or the assurance about that diagnosis at a moment is part of the department's review before they decide to bring someone to care court? I mean, there is an investigation into the appropriateness of the diagnosis before they're brought into care court? I was looking at that process.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It can either be at two stages. Certainly, if DPH is going to be the petitioner, we do that in advance of filing a petition with the court. In cases where a family member, for example, has filed directly with the court, that's part of our investigative responsibilities to the court.
Okay. Now, second
The
quick
court
question.
in that, just to add that, and correct me, Angelica, the court, if the petition comes in through the court may do some upfront determination and based on, I think, not high-level clinical criteria or eligibility, may choose to not even bring the case to us.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. I may have missed this, but at what point is there, does the individual who is being determined whether or not they're appropriate for care court or something else, at what point are they represented in that hearing? And who is it that would be representing them? Under LPS, it's very clear. And it's,
Yeah.
But in this process, who is their advocate if they're in
Yeah.
a room?
The public defender, right? And
Not necessarily. Yeah. So the way the care court legislation works, so they are assigned an attorney as soon as there's a petition filed. So just to say through the whole process, they have an attorney, and appreciate this question. It's a little bit different than assisted outpatient treatment or conservatorship, where it's a public defender's office unless there's a conflict. The way the legislation was written for care court, attorney firms could apply to be representative. So yes, there's CAP and LAE and public defender's office, if needed, are kind of like a backup for that representation. But these are attorneys that, and I think this is a great point, that are newer to working in these civil court processes around things like serious mental illness.
Okay. And then the sort of last question, maybe the open-ended one we'll be talking about, but I still have, what happens when an individual, if they refuse to take part in the outpatient services they've been remanded to through a court and they don't meet LPS criteria? What's the consequence of saying, thank you, judge, thank you, care court, I think I'm just going to go do what I want to do? And they don't meet LPS.
I mean, the short answer is there are no enforcement mechanisms here. So if they don't meet LPS criteria where they're not deteriorated, where that level of intervention, really as a department, we continue to try to engage people, monitor them for deterioration. And of course, we don't hope that people deteriorate in that way. We'd like to redirect people away from restrictive interventions. But for us, it's really about that monitoring and looking at other ways to engage them. But ultimately, this is a civil court process. People are not remanded. There's no being held in contempt. Nothing like that happens if somebody doesn't participate in the process.
And just related to that, part of the decision about voluntarily participating in a service demands that there be a range of appropriate services that the person might agree to participate in. In other words, there, in the extent to how this is being implemented around the state, just to use one example, Los Angeles County has very few resources that match some of the ones that are in San Francisco. So those clients are more at risk of not having a referral that they would want to participate in because of the limited nature of that system of care. And another county right next to it may have a rich system of care. So whether or not somebody gets the opportunity for the use of the robe process, encouraging them into treatment, depends everything on whether or not the service system is built out enough so that people see a program that they would participate in. As one example, there's many consumers who would participate in a program run by people with lived experience or a client-centered service, and that's a rare service in California. So those folks don't have the same opportunity to say, I'd be happy to participate in a program if you had one like this, but you're so limited in what you're offering, it puts me at risk to be under the purview of the care court or even conservatorship. I just wanted to make that point.
And Steve.
Yeah. Thank you.
Steve.
Good morning.
Hello.
You're probably familiar with the Chronicle piece that ran about 3 weeks ago, since you're quoted in the article.
Care court?
And I'll give you, yeah, I'll
Could you
give you,
send it to the group if you don't mind?
yeah,
Okay, thanks.
and I'll give you all the time you want to respond to it. But there's one aspect of the story that struck with me, and that is a question as to how effective how effective outreach has been to families. And it contrasts like with Los Angeles, that nearly all the referrals are coming from families. But in San Francisco, there have been there have been very, very few. And there are some complaints from some families or organizations that represent families that they're not getting a lot of outreach. And I know you were quoted in the article that you were stepping up the outreach to families, but it seems families can be this is a resource for them, as well as for the department, as well as for agencies that care as well as care agencies. So I'm just curious kind of where things are on the family outreach.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I'll say that, like, of course, like there is always more and better that we can be doing to like inform the public, inform families, inform community about the work. And of course, there's lots of efforts around that. That being said, like we've had several conversations with NAMI. Now, granted, like we need to do more in terms of presenting to NAMI membership, but several conversations with NAMI. And I think something that looks different in San Francisco is, again, we have a robust AOT program that was established in 2015. And so a lot of families leverage that and then might get directed to care court if they're not appropriate for AOT. Unlike other counties, also, just to reiterate that we implemented a consultation line. So we receive a lot of calls there, many of which are from family members, which provides us with an opportunity to really identify, like, is this the right place for them, rather than going through the process of filing a petition with the court and having that conversation. And it might be disappointing because it's not the best fit or the person doesn't meet criteria. So I think we've done a lot more of that upstream of like before something even gets to the court, how do we engage with families and other community members? How do we make sure this is a right intervention, or what other tools are available? And also we can do better around that.
We have, I think, if I may also, I mean, we were disappointed with that article for this reason, among others. We have done a lot of speaking with groups that include family members. We have been trying to spread the word. And so I'm not sure it's a measure of our, without being defensive about this, a measure of our failure as a department to have not seen as many referrals from families. These are complex environments. And importantly, our jurisdiction, our city has made really good use of AOT. And that often can sort of, even though the family member is not a referent, in consultation with us, if we then find the person meets criteria, we are able to advance that petition. And we, reading that assessment, know that there's always more to do and much better community outreach intersections with family members who are suffering along with the person.
I think most journalists do a hell of a job, but sometimes the closer you are to a story, the more you look at the story and say, well, they didn't quite get this right, or they didn't quite get that right. And it's not an uncommon reaction.
I also think what is still outstanding about this program, or still, do us and the people of California, is what is the evaluation ultimately going to be? This is an invented program by the state, by the governor. It's not built on there's no models, scientific models that show effectiveness. So we are we support trying new things, but I think it's really important at the end of the day, and the state has committed to this, is to do a statewide evaluation about the health impact ultimately. Has this led to more people coming into care, being stabilized in care, achieving better health and social outcomes? That's the question at the end of the day.
Too soon to get there?
I think we're too soon.
No doubt.
We're too soon. So it began in October. We're 6-ish months in.
Some counties or cities are doing it. Right?
We are one of 5 or 7 cohort 1 counties.
Yeah.
All counties will be obliged to roll this out. I think LA is next. They may have already started. I'm looking at Annie and Angelica, who are on the work group. And the other learning is that it takes some time between identification or referral and then having a care plan both accepted by the client voluntarily, and then having a chance to engage in treatment. So very few of those thus far have made it to that stage.
Yeah.
I would suggest reaching out to SSI programs, some of the mental health clinics. As far as to engage with more families and people that are dealing with people with mental health. This is a outpatient program.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I just can't really see it much more than kind of a half measure. I mean, like if somebody has like severe mental health problems, and I actually have dealt. I was caretaker for his name was Connect Rabokovich or something like that, and you give him some money, you know what he's gonna do? He's gonna throw the money in the air. Swear to God. Or he'll disappear. His family is out here, and he'll wind up in Chicago. He's a white Latin who loves Farrakhan, hates white people, right? White guy though. But he'd be in the deepest ghettos, right? You know, but here's a guy, you know, it's like, you know, I talked with his dad, and his dad, you know, said, you know, you could tell he's a genius, you know, but his dad said his mom had the same mental health issues, and his popped up right when he was in the middle of college. The symptoms came in. He got stabilized for a minute when he took his medication, and when he stopped taking his medication, you know, it's severe. So I don't know. I mean, like, unless there's some type of enforcement. I mean, when somebody has those kind of deep rooted issues where they can't independently take care of themselves, you know, and he was like an outpatient. I don't know where he's at today, but I don't know if he's alive. But
Yeah, thanks, Jamil. Thanks for that comment. I think that really highlights that this program it's not a solution for everyone by any means. I think that we are finding that it may be a solution for some people, but it is not intended to be. And as I think Angelica was describing, we think of it as upstream, meaning catching some people perhaps before they get worse and would benefit from a more restrictive environment.
but less severe mental health.
Yeah.
Let's say, yeah.
Or more amenable for whatever reason to treatment. So somebody who has enough insight or is able to, with a bit of nudging or a bit of oversight, able to say, oh, gee, I've got all these people worried about me, or something about how their illness is or how they are, is able to respond, right? With a little bit of a more formalistic, as you know, Angelica said, sort of being in the court, adding some pressure, but it is not, we do not think that everyone will benefit. And
What is the treatment?
the treatment is, a treatment gets made of what is called a care plan in consultation with the person, with the individual who's affected, and with the clinical team. The idea is to offer sort of a menu of options. Often we are recommending ICM level of care or intensive case management, which comes with treatment and case management, and comes with outreach, and comes with, you know, other things like transportation, and we're going to help you with activities and so forth. But a person might say, gee, I only want, as Member Fields just said, I only want peer support. You know, and it may be that we agree that we'll try that for a bit, or we have the ability to sort of, with the judge, with the court, to make a care plan, ideally that the person, well, it's voluntary, so it's got to be what the person agrees to. Tell me if I get it right.
You're good.
I would say with AOT and HHGs, I mean, there are folks who are not currently in care, and then they come into the short-term ICM care, and some of them actually do really well and don't even need ICM and get transferred to one of the regular outpatient clinics, or otherwise they come to us, right? They come to my program for longer term care, and sometimes that goes really well, right? We've got folks that are still with us from when AOT very first started, and they've remained in care. And some folks, you know, are fairly stable, and hopefully one day we'll step down to outpatient, and some folks might literally need ICM lifelong that have come in through AOT, and we work very closely with their families, because those folks definitely, a lot of them have active family members, and that's how they got involved with us. And so it's interesting. This will have be able to take referrals from, you know, other folks, but you know, it's kind of curious to me that, you know, we still, like with the stabilization program, got a lot of referrals from EMS 6, and hot team and such. So, I mean, those folks are still getting picked up from that stabilization team. So, but there's no black robe effect with that, right? So, but I think it's been one problem that does happen with that is that folks do engage because of the gift cards. And then when they come to focus because we don't have those things, right? And so then they're kind of like, what good are you? F off. Literally. So, so it's, so they might engage initially because they're getting some incentives. But, they can't stay with those temporary ICM teams, forever. And they come to us and then we end up often, not often, but definitely losing them sometimes. Some of the more severe folks that are.
Time check is we have 30
Yeah.
minutes left. Well,
Yeah, we got to go to SB 42.
for the presentation.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah. Are there any more questions with us? So we move on to the SB 43.
So let them get through the minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
All right.
Let's do it.
So delving into SB 43, next slide, please. SB 43 went into effect January 1st of this year. Counties were able to delay implementation. San Francisco chose to move forward with implementing on January 1st. That's okay, I love the puppy. This was based on a bill from Senator Eggman that amended the grave disability criteria. For those of you who may be familiar, the Lanterman-Petra Short Act fully went into effect in 1972. And so this is the first major modernization of the LPS Act since that time. What it changes in the definition, prior to Senate Bill 43, grave disability was isolated to an individual being unable to care for their basic needs like food, shelter, and clothing due to a mental disorder or chronic alcoholism. What has now changed as of January 1st of this year is that can also be related to a severe substance use disorder, so not alcohol alone. And it also expanded the criteria for grave disability, and that it could be that an individual is unable to care for their basic needs like food, shelter, or clothing, but also that they may be unable to attend to their personal safety or necessary medical care. This applies from the initial 5150 or involuntary hold at 72 hours through the whole course of somebody's potential stay in an involuntary setting. So 5250, 14 days, et cetera, all the way through conservatorship. So this updated criteria applies to all of those holds under the Lanterman-Petra Short Act. The severe substance use disorder diagnosis is based off of whatever the current DSM is. So it's based off of that criteria. And personal safety is defined as the ability of one to survive safely in the community without involuntary detention or treatment. Just to note, this overlaps a little bit with danger to self, or you might be asking yourself about that. This does overlap a little bit with that criteria for 5150 of danger to self. Some examples of this might be somebody who's really impaired and wandering into traffic. So they're not intentionally trying to harm themselves, but because they are so impaired, they are putting their physical safety at risk. And necessary medical care is defined as care needed to prevent serious deterioration of an existing physical medical condition, which if left untreated is likely to result in serious bodily injury. An example of this, which has come up, is that somebody might have a wound or a fracture that they're not treating, and they're unwilling to accept care and they're at risk of an amputation. So that's an example of what might meet this criteria. So we're still talking about the extreme situations of involuntary care, but really this is expanding the criteria with the goal of us really looking at what we're seeing now, I had to think about the year for a second, in 2024, like where are we? What we're seeing now in 2024 and the complexities of the cases that we're seeing, and also how we better support individuals who have these really complex needs. Okay, next slide. We went the wrong way, sorry. Oh, no, we didn't. You're good, sorry. I don't. Okay, So this is just another visual of what we just talked about. So I won't belabor this, but this just looks at what was in the old criteria for grave disability and what changed as of January 1st. Next slide. And again, not to delve into this too much, but this is the severe substance use disorder is based off of the current DSM. Currently, we're in DSM-5. For those of you who aren't familiar, DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. It's what we use. It's our guide for diagnosing individuals and the criteria for those diagnoses. Okay, so this and again, the severe substance use disorder is really expanding it beyond just chronic alcoholism, but again, really modernizing that. Like I would say alcoholism is probably the least of our challenges that we're seeing in the community when we're seeing people this impaired. And so again, it's really providing us with pathways to have appropriate interventions where before we did not have the tools to intervene and support people who were really vulnerable and really impaired in the community. I gave a couple hypotheticals already for this. So just to talk about a couple more, personal safety, we talked about running in and out of traffic. It could be that somebody has multiple near fatal overdoses. So we're not talking about somebody who has one overdose, but somebody who has many overdoses that have resulted in significant medical interventions or hospitalizations where somebody's really impaired around their substance use. Necessary medical care we talked about in terms of the risk of amputation. This could be that somebody has a severe medical condition like diabetes that they're not caring for that is likely to result in serious negative outcomes if not cared for. Okay, next slide. So with implementation of SB 43, there was a mayoral directive, and we have an executive steering committee. We are co-chairing that as the Department of Public Health with the Department of Disability and Aging Services. For people who are not familiar, the Department of Disability and Aging Services is under HSA, and that the Department of Disability and Aging Services is who has the conservators. So conservators are outside of the Department of Public Health. We do partner very closely with them, but it is separate from the Department of Public Health. We have done a lot of training around SB 43 in advance of implementation on January 1st. And so everyone who is authorized under Dr. Cunnen's directive to be able to initiate 5150 or those involuntary holds in the community had to complete a training around SB 43 and what changed. That training has been accessed more that we did live trainings and then a recorded training to reach people. That training has been accessed more than 1,000 times. We've done a lot of public information, fact sheet development, educational materials, consultation around cases. And our responsibility as the Department of Public Health is to be the service provider for most individuals who might end up being placed on a conservatorship. I'll just say there are some limitations if somebody is a vet, for example, that the VA would be their provider.
I'm interrupting.
Please.
I need to leave for a meeting. Angelica's got it. I will catch up about questions and we're happy to come back.
Of course.
Yeah. I know this is very meaty.
So I think we just be mindful of time that Dr. Hom, who's after this, will have a 10:55 hard stop. So I think we'll probably have to keep questions sort of brief. We're also happy to record some to follow up offline if we need to as well. So.
And the good news is this is my last time. And I'll try not to go rogue with Hillary. The other thing that I'm sure people have questions around is about short and long-term beds. So we know that this is something that we are constantly critically looking at. This is really an opportunity with the Executive Steering Committee for us to identify where there are needs, where there are gaps, what is the need for this population in terms of placements. And of course, we've had a lot of new opportunities to be able to invest in that and to enter into contracts a little bit more easily to help expedite those processes. The last thing that I'll note before opening it up for questions is one of the things that we have historically struggled with, because of course we don't oversee all the hospitals, is really having comprehensive data around who is seen on a 5150 and those reasons for 5150s. There's a lot that's changing around this, unrelated to SB 43, but will really benefit SB 43. Of course, we know a lot about the people we're serving through SB 43, But again, we're lacking in that population level information. SB 929 is not fully in effect yet, but this is, again, separate. It was separate from this expansion, but it requires hospitals to provide the Department of Public Health, the county, with a lot of information about who they're seeing on a 5150, the reason for 5150s, what happened to individuals on a 5150, and to the level that we'd have people's names so that we can look at across hospitals, who's been seen, what's going on, so we can really have more comprehensive information to support people and be more proactive in our interventions, which is great. The other thing that we'll have that's going into effect is AB 2242, which I've talked about before, but it's been a while. That requires that hospitals have a model care coordination plan for anybody who's being discharged on a 5150. So it requires that hospitals will really have to do more to support those connections to care, which again, we're very excited about. And finally, for people who haven't heard, we are moving to Epic on May 22nd, which is going to be our new electronic health record, which is a big lift. But one of the things that we have in there is a build around 5150. So any of our providers who are initiating 5150 holds will have much more comprehensive data tracking, both to know when a 5150 hold was initiated, what happened to the person, and also to be able to collect information about challenges related to that. I know, Andrea, you alluded to this, like there's the enforcement of affidavit Bs, which I can talk about, briefly, but there's also sometimes challenges in getting people to the hospital and limitations around that. And so it will really allow us to track that data more. So again, like we, of course, are always client-centered. We care about people individually, but we also need that population level data so that we can make data-driven and informed recommendations and policy changes. Okay, I'll stop there. I feel like I'm gonna get hooked.
Okay, so we got Sarah, Steve, no.
Jim.
It's like there's a lot of Steves in the room.
You're almost.
How did you know? My
No,
hand was on the
I felt
way.
like I just did generalization of the white guys, though. Sorry. McGuigan, member McGuigan. So we got Sarah McGuigan, Steve Fields. Sarah, take it away.
I know it was limited and not sufficient, but I also do know there were some state funds attached to this or that were required. And I know a fair amount of that was to be for housing or there was the hope or, anyway, I do know there was a lot of discussion when this passed around housing needs and how that will fit into this picture. And I'm wondering if you could tell us both about where housing kind of fits in with this as far as treatment of these folks, and then also the funding kind of picture around both housing and also, the other funds required to do this and where we are with that.
Yeah. I'm going to amend slightly. The funding was for Care Court. There is actually no funding for SB.
Well, that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, and what you're referencing is
Demanding. Okay, so
I know the bridge housing block grant.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and so that was and I should specify, counties, cohort one counties got a little bit more of an incentive, but counties got some money for Care Court to implement, which of course is helping to support those intensive case management services, the team that's doing all those evaluations, et cetera. The bridge housing block grant,
which is for Care Court as well.
So what's interesting about that is like, yes and no. It is called out as Care Court participants have to be prioritized. It
Okay.
is not exclusively for Care Court. And I am not the expert of that, so I'll defer. Maybe that's a future conversation to give an update on where things are at with the bridge housing block grant.
Okay.
But also to clarify, it's actually not allowed to pay for housing. It is only for transitional placements.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
That being said,
If we could get some kind of follow-up on that funding picture. Yes, that would be great. And by email's fine.
What I was going to say, though, is for Care Court and for people who are on conservatorship, we work very closely with HSH. Not that that is, of course, the answer to everything and looking at our treatment services, but for people who are stabilized, who would benefit and be successful in housing placements, We have a very close working relationship with them to streamline that. As an example, for Care Court, for people who are appropriate for an HSH placement, the Care Court DPH team does the coordinated, so we do the coordinated entry assessments. So somebody may refuse to participate, and that's okay. We fill it out for them, and it's more for data tracking. It's not a requirement. There's not scoring that people need to meet. So we do have, not that it's an ideal situation, but we really have worked to partner with them to create smoother pathways and landing paths for people.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Steve,
McGuigan.
First, thank you for coming in. And one comment is I'm very happy to see you guys going on Epic, and there's a lot of measuring that needs to be done. I've been yelling and screaming for the year and a half that I've been on here. What gets measured gets managed. I don't think that we do a very good job at measuring things.
No.
So, but a couple questions I have just to see you can point me in the right direction is for the DSM-5, it says 10 symptoms or 11 symptoms in two different places. Where can I look at what the symptoms are?
I'll look to Valerie. Happy to
We have a slide.
break out, but yeah, we
Okay.
do, but I also, yeah.
Okay. And then the executive steering committee, do we know who's on that? Where's
right.
that?
Thank you. Yeah.
Like
Is there a
where?
roster of-
Yeah, is there a roster of that or where that's at? Do you know?
I can send the mayor's directive.
Okay.
Lists who needs to be on it. I'm happy to-
Perfect.
with
Okay.
that as well.
But what about individuals who do serve on it? Is there something like that?
I believe that's public record as well.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah,
double check.
we can check on
You have, you have
And
to.
find it, probably find it.
Trying to give me
Okay.
a call. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then I guess just, this is great. I guess my only question is, I'm curious to see like how many people do you think this would apply to right now or would be eligible for this on the streets of San Francisco right now? I mean, I'm just curious as what you guys think the estimate would be.
yeah. I'm gonna be totally frank, I'm not gonna answer the question because this is something that grave disability is so nuanced, it's really impossible for us to estimate. And so that's something like we're tracking really closely and looking at that. One of the things, and we didn't delve into this, but one of the things that we've done in partnership with DOS is all of the departments, everyone who's represented on the steering committee, this is part of the mayoral directive, how to submit names of people that they think may be gravely disabled under the new criteria. And so we've been working to work our way through that list. This is one of those things where it's like, it's hard because it's kind of impossible. Like we could look at hospitalizations, we can look at different kinds of contacts, but because grave disability is so nuanced, like all of those are going to give us inflated estimates of who might meet criteria. So that's my non-answer. So.
Yeah. Steve Fields.
Thank you, Dr. Almeida. It's a lot of stuff to deal with here. I'm curious, though, what's been happening often when we've been meeting with the department for the last decade and a half on MHSF is there's never any mention anymore of two things. One is a commitment to recovery as a goal for the system of care, and then a commitment to build out a community-based system of care that moves us in that direction. That doesn't show anymore when the department comes before this body. And again, partly our responsibility is the implementation of MHSF that's very clear about a commitment to expand community-based services, not just, as it is here, short and long-term beds, which I assume mean maintenance care, not recovery-based, which takes, an effort. So is there an intention, somebody who reaches a point where a 5150 is used, particularly in an instance involving substance use, but also someone also with a severe mental illness concomitantly with substance use. It's a crisis. It's not a treatment program. The hospital is not going to be a long-term treatment program for people who come in under a 5150, even if we expand the criteria. skilled nursing facilities, which I assume are big in the plan of the department, which are all over the Bay, all over the state of California, are stabilization efforts. But the person at some point still goes through the LPS criteria, the 72-hour hearing, the 2-week certification, and the repeated review of that. So when somebody who has reached the point of crisis ends up, and I actually support the idea of somebody whose substance use results in a hospitalization, when they reach the point of coming back to the community, are we actually saying now as a department that treatment in the community is not a priority, just housing, stabilization, and case management? Or are we going to talk about the fact that those individuals reach the point of needing to be hospitalized because of the lack of options or access to treatment programs in the community that might have prevented that person from getting worse? And when they leave the hospital, where are they going to go where recovery and treatment, which is a standard operational methodology in the substance use and now increasingly in dual diagnosis use, is geared toward the person reaching a point of dealing with their substance use and living in the community? I'm just curious, it never shows up anymore in the language of the department. And I'd like some clarity on that. Are we abandoning recovery? Are we telling Health Right 360 that your 24-hour treatment programs aren't necessary anymore because we can do this with case management and housing and hospitalization? Or is that just not yet developed in your planning going forward for meeting the dictates of MHSF to build out a community-based treatment system, along with whatever other emergency measures we employ in cases of acute need?
So thank you for that feedback. I'll say here, the like short-term beds, I think are exactly what you're talking about. And I think that's helpful feedback. And I'm like, where do I even start here? In delving into like conservatorship, for example, like of course placement comes up as a huge need, both in terms of treatment programs for where people can be successful there, and longer term placements and sometimes more restrictive secure settings for individuals. But it's really that continuum. One of the things that's unique to San Francisco that we don't see across the state around conservatorship is that we don't actually require that people go to the hospital to be able to initiate a conservatorship. It could be that layering this on to community services is something that allows us to keep people in the community. I've certainly had this situation where somebody was at risk of eviction and conservatorship is what allowed us to keep them safe in the community. And so San Francisco, unlike many other counties where it's a one-to-one, that if somebody's conserved, they're in a secure setting or a locked treatment facility, San Francisco is unique that we have the largest population of people who are on conservatorship who are in community settings, including those treatment programs that you noted, which we really see as being important with the expansion of SB 43 in terms, particularly around the substance use disorder treatment needs, but also for any individual. And this is something that San Francisco has long been committed to. So I appreciate that, because I appreciate that it doesn't feel like it's highlighted here. And I think I'll say for myself, like in part because it's so central to what we do, that we can do a better job highlighting it. Putting on my other hat for a second, as my actual role as the director of AOA, this is something that like is the bulk of our work, is how do we reinforce, how do we support, how do we modify services to really meet the needs of the community? Because of course, these are incredibly important interventions. And I would say I feel strongly like there are times when these are necessary interventions and they should be a last resort for people. And so I know that I can say for myself, and I know for us as a behavioral health team, that we have a deep commitment.
I appreciate that, because, you know, what's odd is we have a field that talks all the time about best practices, implying that we have a lot of knowledge about that. And what's curious about these conversations emerging from state leadership and in our responses to them, and how Prop 1 is implemented will say a lot about our commitment to actually community-based treatment. There is a lot of evidence that community-based 24-hour treatment works. there's no evidence yet, and Dr. Cunnins alluded to this as experimental, that mandating treatment in the case of substance use, but also people with severe complicated mental health and substance use, mandated treatment, there's no best practices study on that. But we're obsessed with the idea that if we can just force someone into treatment, they'll get better. So I would like to see that emerge more in our discussion with MHSF is how do we prevent people from getting to the point where we're having all these short-term crisis, high cost, low reimbursement interventions. So I appreciate your answer, Dr. Almeida. That's building out our community systems, the key to this, and closing that gap between housing and short-term, high-level acute interventions, and realizing that, you know, that recovery is a process that takes an intervention at a number of levels. So I'd like to see that start to get highlighted because it's curiously missing whenever the department talks about building out systems of care. So thank you.
Jamil,
Do a time check, because I think we have some folks who are presenting.
I know I need to leave and we have to vote, I mean, probably on the minutes, but I know you had your hand up. So, we'll let, Member Patterson say something briefly. And then we, yes, please.
I mean, well, for one, right, because it is overlapping, the subject is overlapping from drug abuse to actual mental health. Like, case I brought up, he wasn't on drugs at all. He just had a chemical imbalance. I have concerns about what actually is treatment on both of those lines, right? I think that's a bit blurred. I've been somebody that has been a mental health patient. Mine wasn't severe at all. I ain't even take any medication. But, you know, I had a psychiatrist and I had a medical doctor. And they were scolding me about not taking the medication. I really didn't need it. But it was tied to the money. But they also gave me education. I'm going to land the plane here. Is that, you know, when you're going through mental health, sometimes it is a chemical imbalance and the medication balances you. So I just got concerned, you know, it's just, like, well, what is the treatment? What is the actual treatment with this? But also, I'll say this, you need to include, you know, those psychiatrists and those medical doctors. They need to be a part of this process. Take some insight from them because they were very formative for me as a patient. And I've gotten people psychiatry before, and I've gotten myself psychiatry.
So I thank you, Mr. Patterson. I think one thing I'm just thinking from this is that perhaps it might be good to have, I mean, we had planned for HSH to come and present, but it also might be really good maybe for utilization management to come and present, right? Because a lot of what members here are talking about are the expanded, you know, the outpatient treatment programs that are under the DPH-BHS umbrella, right? And like, what is the capacity that we have there? It'd be really interesting to see, you know, what, you know, based on like what the need is, what is our capacity, what is the criteria for these programs, who's getting authorized, whatnot, where are they coming from to those programs? So maybe it's something, Valerie, to plan for in future. I think also, I don't know if the department has a definition of recovery, and that might be really good to understand because I think that there's, it's not consistent what all the DPH contractors, PHS contractors think is recovery, right? That's becoming more and more apparent that there's risks in what folks think is recovery. And it would be good to kind of.
And treatment, like Jamil said.
And treatment. So
It leads to recovery.
So yeah, so there's a lot of things that need to be, gaps that need to be bridged. And Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Angelica.
Good to see you too, Dr. Almighty.
So, and I just want to know, we only have Dr. Hom until 10:55, so we need to do minutes very quickly. And then we will do
Do
action.
we need to do public comment?
We need to do public comment.
Oh, sorry.
So public comment for discussion item 1, which was the director's update, is per usual. So I'll call first on the people who are here from the public in person, which there is not anybody. And then anybody wishing to make a public comment who is joining us online, please raise your virtual hand. And we will unmute you and you will have 2 minutes to make public comment. So please raise your hand now if you would like to make public comment. Refreshing. I do not see any hands raised. So I think, Chair, that we can close public comment.
Great. So what's looking for the slide?
Now we're on slide 20.
20.
It is the overdose.
Oh, we're not gonna vote. Well, right, that's what we have to, that's the slide I'm looking for.
So I want to
minutes?
just, no,
Oh, here we go. Here we go. I found it. 41.
we need to do minutes briefly and then we'll get Dr. Hom started. And when Member McGuigan needs to leave, we need to pause briefly to formally move to adjourn the meeting and then we may continue the presentation. Without the comment.
I just want to make a point too that when multiple people are speaking, Steve has a hard time hearing. So if we could keep it to one person.
We will now vote to approve the March 2024 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
To approve.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Great. Diana calls roll call.
Yes. First, we need to get public comment on the meeting minutes. So the same thing as I just said. If you would like to say that.
Okay.
And you're joining us online, please raise your hand now.
No, I don't want.
No hands are raised. So Chair, I believe we could go to the vote, which is on slide 41.
Yeah, it says Diana, but
Okay, oh, we already did this. Yes, so we already
I
have
will now call roll call.
the seconds and all that. Okay, so I'll now call roll call. If you vote yes, that means you are approving the March minutes. No means you are not. Member Fields,
Yes.
Member Gonzalez.
Yes.
Member Lipton,
Yes.
Member McGuigan.
Yes.
Member Patterson,
See,
Member Salinas,
Yes.
Member Short.
Yes.
We have 7 yeses and 0 nos, so we have a majority of vote to approve the March 2024 minutes. So handing it back to you, Chair.
Yeah.
Now going to slide.
We are moving to discussion item number 2, an update on the city's overdose prevention and response efforts from Population Health Director Jeffrey Hom. Thank you, Mr. Hom.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I appreciate the chance to come back to provide an update. And I'm just going to get right into it. I do apologize I have to leave early, but I will be happy again to come back. If I go to the next slide here. Here's what I'm going to cover over the next half hour or so, but please do feel free to stop me. I know there's a lot of thoughts and ideas and concerns about this topic, and so I'm very happy to just have more of a discussion around this, using this as sort of the framework for my comments. First, I wish just to share some updated numbers, talk about our implementation of our overdose prevention plan, say a few words specifically about buprenorphine and methadone and why we're specifically putting a lot of our efforts behind these two medications, and then end with some words about naloxone distribution. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, as I think you all know, being very steeped into this, unfortunately, 2023 was a record year for us in San Francisco. We had 810 unintentional overdose deaths in 2023 alone, according to the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. That is 25% above just 1 year where we were 1 year before. And I'll just say from a public health point of view, as I think you all know here, that an increase of that magnitude over 1 year is profound. There are rarely other public health crises that increase so much from just 1 year to the next. And so as you can sort of see on this graph, which is the number of overdose deaths by month in San Francisco, we are on this upward trajectory from where we began back in 2022, which is where this graph starts on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. I think when I previously came here was sort of talking about our overdose prevention plan, and this remains sort of like the blueprint that we are using to, really address our overdose crisis. It's built upon the best available evidence that we do have in the state here and in the state, in the country, and really try to apply it, applying it to our local situation and circumstances in San Francisco. These are the 4 strategic areas. I won't go into all of them in detail, just in the interest of time, but I'm very happy to, revisit them or we can talk about them. Again, the URL for the full plan is at the bottom there on this slide here, and I'm happy to send it out separately again as if it would be helpful. Valerie had said I might need to stop here.
I know. She's the one who knows the guidance, so.
Until we have her exact,
Yeah.
we can say that we now no longer have quorum, so the meeting is closed and we are continuing on as a public meeting,
Yes.
but just kind of informational rather than a formal.
Okay.
Can't put you off the island though.
Right.
Stay for one more meeting then.
We
Okay.
still want to hear.
Yes, of course.
Now it's formally.
Yes.
Okay.
Program.